Hello and welcome to the FatBoss guide to Guarm in the Trial of Valor.
So this encounter is a little bit weird. It's been labelled as the new Butcher, so it has a healing and a damage requirement, but it's a little bit more complex than that. The encounter does have simple mechanics, however, if you fuck up on them in one way or another, it has really severe results. No matter what difficult you're doing this, whether it is normal or heroic, you have to do the encounter properly, otherwise you are going to struggle. Now to kickstart off this guide, we might as well get the most important thing out of the way first, which is positioning. The encounter area consists of this narrow corridor, and the best place to tank the boss is right in the middle of the bridge, facing towards the entrance. You need your tanks to be stood on top of each other the entire time. The reason for this is that the boss has a cleave-like effect with his melee hits, and if there's no one within 5 yards of the target that he's attacking, he'll hit that target twice instead, very much like Butcher, so make sure you're stacked. But also melee, make sure that you're nowhere near the tanks as well, especially when the boss is being moved, just to prevent you from getting a stray hit and being one-shot. Melee, you want to be stood to the sides of the boss, and range DPS you want to be 25 yards or more in front of the boss. The reason for this is because of an ability called Flashing Fangs. When the boss casts this ability, it simply just deals a cone of damage to everyone within 25 yards in front of him. So just outrange it, and the only people that will take damage from it is your tanks. But the reason why you want to face the boss towards the entire raid is because of Guardian's Breath. Now frequently the boss will cast this, and all it does is simply spawn a cone out of each of the heads of the boss. One will always be fire, one will always be frost, and one will always be shadow. However, they will spawn in random orders. Now all three of the breaths do the exact same thing. They deal a large amount of damage that is split between all players that are stood inside it. However, when you're first hit by a breath, it'll also brand you. This brand simply links you with that particular breath type. And if you're hit by any other breath type throughout the entire encounter, you will simply be one shot. So if you first take the fire, you need to take fire for the rest of the fight. If you're first hit by shadow, you've got to take shadow, and if you're hit by the frost, you got to stick to the frost. Otherwise, you are going to be one shot. So a common strategy for these breaths is simply splitting your raid into 3 equal groups just to share the damage from all the breaths. You can, however, experiment slightly. A strategy that we were using on our kills is having our tanks solo one breath and splitting the raid into 2 groups and having them soak the others. This strategy makes healing the raid a lot easier, but your tanks are going to take a burst of damage. If your tanks struggle with this strategy because they're being one shot from the ability, don't use it. Don't bother running with it. It's not going to give you that much of an advantage. Now, if a player decides not to get hit by the breath, the boss will gain a 5% damage increase, and this is permanent. Not only is it permanent, but it stacks. And this boss every 60 seconds has an ability that deals a ridiculous amount of AoE damage, and if this stat goes too high, players are simply going to get one shot or you're not going to have enough healing cooldowns. So make sure that you always get hit by a breath, otherwise you can ruin the fight very early on. Now while the ranged DPS are stood 25 yards away from the boss avoiding the Flashing Fangs whilst being within reasonable range of a Guardian's Breath, you will also have to spread 5 yards because of an ability called Guardian Licks. Throughout the encounter, the boss will either do a fire, a frost, or a shadow lick. All 3 licks simply apply a debuff. The boss will simply target a player and apply the debuff to them. However, the debuff will then immediately try and jump to anyone within 5 yards of that player. So if you're spread already and you're still on your own, you're the only person that's going to receive the debuff. However, if you're stacked on the top of 5 players, all 5 of those players and yourself are going to receive the debuff all at the exact same time, which can very easily cause a wipe. So it's vital that you're spread. Players that receive the Flame Lick debuff do pulsing AoE damage around themselves. Frost Lick players become frozen and stunned for 5 seconds, but fortunately enough this effect can be dispelled. If multiple people get hit by it, using mass dispel is a really good idea. The most important thing to know is that you need to dispel them fast. This ability can come in at the exact same time a breath comes in. And if those players aren't dispelled, well, they're not going to get into the breath and the boss is going to get stacked. So that player is going to be in the wrong breath and they're going to be killed. And lastly, the Shadow Lick simply puts a large healing absorb on that player. You just need to heal it up just so it's removed.
Another reason for the ranged players to be spread is because of an ability called Roaring Leap. Guarm will knock back all players within 25 yards, and then he will select the largest clump of players in the encounter area and jump on them, dealing a fair amount of damage to them, but also knocking them slightly up into the air, just enough to interrupt a cast. Now, because positioning on this fight is so important because of the Flashing Fangs and the Guardian's Breath and all that kind of stuff, you really want the Roaring Leap to jump onto melee players. So if all melee players are stacked up on top of each other, the boss should see, oh, okay, that's the largest clump of players, and just jump onto them instead, keeping his position in the encounter area relatively the same. At the exact time of recording right now, the boss isn't following this rule whatsoever. Whether or not something has majorly changed and he isn't picking the largest clump of players as suggested in the dungeon journal, or he's just a bit bugged at the moment, we're not too sure. However, if you can get it to jump on melee, always do try to do that because it's very, very beneficial. If he's going to be a bastard from here on out, then you just have to deal with him jumping around the encounter area and just having to try and reposition him ready for the next Flashing Fangs or Guardian's Breath. Now, with all this raid-wide damage bursting out across your raid, it might be really enticing for you to use healing cooldowns at these points, but you really must save them for his most damaging ability to the raid, which is Headlong Charge. Guarm will jump to one of the four corners of the encounter area and run down one side of them, dealing a huge amount of damage to anyone that is caught in his path, whilst also pulsing out an absolute absurd amount of damage to the raid. Once he reaches the end of the corridor, he will turn around and run down the other side, and once again you just have to run out of the way of it. This is the perfect time to use healing cooldowns because the amount of damage this does to the entire raid is ridiculous, and if you are caught out by it, the amount of damage you'll take alongside the ticking damage that he's already doing to the raid is easily enough to one-shot you. So as soon as he has picked his corner, you want to move out of his way whilst utilising movement speed increases such as Stampeding Roar or your own personal movement speed increases just to move out of his way, and then you want to huddle up and just use healing cooldowns at those points. You want to make sure that you have adequate healing cooldowns for each one of these. Generally speaking, you want to group these healing cooldowns into 3 sets. You set 1 on the first, set 2 on the second charge, and then set 3 on the third charge, and by the time the 4th Headlong Charge comes along, set 1 should be available again, and that's how you want to rotate your healing cooldowns to make sure you do cover the extreme amount of damage coming out from this ability. As soon as he is finished and he's ended up in a corner, you've got to make sure that you position him back into your usual setup as soon as you possibly can. Make sure that you do not stand on top of the tanks, move out of their way, make sure that they can easily turn the boss around, make sure you get him in a nice position so you can just return to the fight as normal. And assuming you can deal with that alongside all the other abilities that we've already spoken about, you just need to kill him on heroic within that 5-minute period before he enrages and one-shots the entire group. So it's all about maximizing the amount of DPS that you can do whilst just trying to stay alive from these very impactful yet simplistic mechanics. One last thing that you may want to consider is when you want to use Bloodlust or Heroism. We recommend generally that you should use it on the pool with everyone having their cooldowns up and trinkets proccing and stuff like that. However, if you have got a very execute heavy DPS composition or just you have like 10 Shadow Priests or some shit, then using Bloodlust towards the end of the encounter might benefit your DPS more than at the beginning. So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help you out, then make sure you do leave a like on it. It helps us out a lot. And if you want to see our written counterpart, our written guide for this fight, then do check it out. It's over on Wowhead. The link is in the description below. Also, we want to say a big thanks to our supporters on Patreon. You guys are absolutely awesome. Thank you so much. And if you would like to join these lovely group of people and help support FatbossTV, then do go over to our Patreon page. The link is in the description below. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching.